All right, so today we're going to do a deep dive into something I think we can all relate to as programmers.
Oh, yeah. Bugs? Yeah, those pesky bugs.
Exactly. But what if I told you that bugs are actually our secret weapon to becoming better programmers?
Hmm. That's an interesting take.
Yeah, we're going to be taking a look at this article from the Algo Academy blog called Learning to Code Through Failure, Embracing Bugs as Your Best Teacher.
Catchy title.
It really is, and I think it really gets to the heart of what we're going to be talking about today.
So no more cursing those error messages.
Well, maybe a little cursing, but hopefully by the end of this deep dive, we'll all have a new appreciation for those little red error messages.
I'm all for that.
So the article starts off by talking about how bugs force us to think like problem solvers.
Right, you can't just coast through. You
Yeah.
actually have to apply to figure out what went wrong.
And I think a lot of times that process is what really solidifies the concepts in our minds.
Absolutely. It's like you can read about a concept in a textbook, but until you actually encounter it in the wild and have to wrestle with it a bit, it doesn't really sink in.
Totally. And the article actually gives this really nice 5-step debugging process.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading about that.
Yeah, it's identify the problem, analyze the code, hypothesize about the cause, test your solution, and implement the fix.
It's like a roadmap for getting from bug to bug free.
Exactly. And what's cool is that it's not just applicable to coding, it's a general problem-solving framework that you can use in any area of life.
That's a good point. It's like those transferable skills that you hear so much about.
Exactly. So let's actually jump into an example. The article talks about a function called calculate average.
Okay, I've seen those a few times.
Yeah, so, at first glance, it seems pretty straightforward. It takes an array of numbers, adds them up, divides by the number of elements, and boom, you've got the average.
Right, but then they throw in a curveball.
Oh, yeah. Those edge cases, they're always
Yes.
lurking.
Always. And in this case, the edge case is what happens if you pass an empty array to the function.
Division by 0.
Exactly, which, as we all know, is a big no-no in the world of math and programming.
So then the question becomes, how do we fix it?
Well, the key is to anticipate those edge cases and build in safeguards to handle them gracefully.
So in this case, you'd probably add a check at the beginning of the function to see if the array is empty, and if it is, return some default value or maybe throw an error.
That's a much better approach than crashing the whole program.
Right, and that's one of the key takeaways from this example. Bugs often arise from unexpected or invalid data.
So it's not enough to just write code that works for the happy path. You
Yeah.
have to think defensively and anticipate potential problems before they blow up in your face.
Absolutely. It's like coding with paranoia.
Maybe a little, but it's a healthy paranoia that can save you a lot of headaches down the road.
So we've talked about how bugs force us to become better problem solvers, but the article also makes the point that debugging can actually deepen our understanding of core programming concepts.
Right. It's like you might think you understand something, but then a bug comes along and exposes a gap in your knowledge.
I've definitely been there.
Yeah.
It's humbling, for sure, but also incredibly enlightening.
Totally. And the article mentions some of the key concepts that bugs can help clarify things like language syntax, data types, scope asynchronous programming, memory management.
It's like a whole buffet of programming fundamentals.
And they use this really interesting example to illustrate the concept of scope.
Oh yeah, the one with the outer function and the inner function.
Exactly. It throws a reference error, which can be a real head scratcher if you're not familiar with how scope works in JavaScript.
Oh yeah, reference error. Those are the ones that tell you a variable is not defined, right?
Exactly. And in this case, the problem arises because the inner function is trying to access a variable that was declared in the outer function but not passed in as an argument.
So it's like each function has its own little world, and the variables inside that world are private unless you explicitly share them with other functions.
That's a great way to put it. And understanding scope is crucial in programming, especially as you start working with larger, more complex code bases.
It can get really tricky to keep track of where variables are defined and where they're accessible.
And that's where those reference error messages can be really helpful. They're like little signposts pointing out where you might have gone astray.
Okay, so we've covered how bugs make us better problem solvers and how they can deepen our understanding of core concepts. But there's another piece to this puzzle.
Debugging itself is a skill.
Yeah, there are good debuggers, and then there are those of us who resort to console logging everything in sight.
We've all been there, but the article emphasizes that honing your debugging skills is essential for becoming a more effective programmer.
So they give us 5 key skills to focus on reading errors, using tools, tracing code, isolating problems, and implementing fixes.
That sounds like a solid toolkit for any aspiring code detective.
Absolutely. And the article goes into detail about each of these skills, offering practical tips and techniques.
Like for reading errors, it stresses the importance of actually paying attention to those error messages.
Yes, sometimes it's tempting to just glance at them and then immediately dive back into the code.
But those messages are actually trying to help us. They provide clues about what went wrong and where to look for the problem.
It's like learning a new language. Once you understand the vocabulary and syntax of error messages, they become much less scary.
Exactly. And then there's the strategic use of console.log.
Yes, the trusty console.log, my debugging companion.
It can be a lifesaver, but the article emphasizes that it's important to use it strategically, not just randomly sprinkle it throughout your code.
Right, you want to think carefully about what variables you need to inspect and at what points in your code execution.
It's like shining a flashlight into the dark corners of your code to see what's going on.
But instead of blindly shining it everywhere, you're using it with precision to illuminate the specific areas where you suspect the bug might be hiding.
And then there are breakpoints.
Breakpoints, those are the ones that let you pause your code's execution, right?
Exactly. They allow you to step through your code line by line, examine the state of your program at any given moment, and really understand how each line affects the overall flow of execution.
So it's like watching the movie of your code unfold frame by frame.
That's a great analogy, and it can be incredibly helpful for understanding those really tricky bugs where you have no idea where to even begin looking.
It's like you're a detective at a crime scene, carefully examining each piece of evidence to reconstruct the events that led to the bug.
Now, the article also talks about simplifying the problem.
Oh yeah, sometimes I have a tendency to overthink things and make the problem seem way more complicated than it actually is.
It happens to the best of us, but the key is to break the problem down into smaller, more manageable chunks.
So instead of trying to tackle the whole enchilada at once, you focus on one specific function or even one specific line of code.
And sometimes the process of simplifying the problem is enough to make the solution jump out at you.
It's like when you explain a problem to someone else, you often end up figuring it out yourself in the process.
And that brings us to another important point. Don't be afraid to ask for help.
Yes, sometimes it feels like admitting defeat, but honestly, a fresh perspective can be so valuable when you're stuck in a debugging rut.
Absolutely. Whether it's a colleague, a mentor, or an online community, there are so many people willing to help.
And often, simply explaining the problem out loud can help you see it in a new light. So we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive. We talked about the 5-step debugging process, how bugs can deepen our understanding of core concepts, and some key debugging skills and tools.
Okay, so last time we were talking all about how those annoying bugs,
The bane of our existence.
well, kind of, but we were talking about how they're actually really great learning opportunities.
Right. Instead of getting frustrated, we could try to see them as like these little puzzles that we need to solve.
And each puzzle helps us level up our coding skills.
Exactly. And we also touched on how Algo Academy, the folks behind that article we're looking at, they've actually designed their platform with this whole bug-driven learning concept in mind.
Yeah, they've got all sorts of interesting features that help us embrace those bugs.
So let's dig into that a bit more. Like, how exactly are they using bugs to teach?
So one way is through their interactive coding challenges. They're designed to deliberately make us trip up.
Wait, so they're intentionally putting bugs in their challenges?
In a way, yes, but it's all in a safe environment.
Mm.
You know, you get instant feedback and guidance, so you learn from those mistakes.
I see. So it's like they're setting traps, but with safety nets.
Exactly. And because you're actually writing code and testing it out, the learning is way more hands-on.
It's not just passively reading a textbook or watching a video. You're right in the trenches battling those bugs.
And sometimes you need a little help in those trenches, which is where Algo Academy's AI-powered assistance comes in.
Yeah, their AI assistant.
Yeah,
I've heard good things about that.
it's pretty cool. It's like having a virtual pair programmer who can spot your mistakes and give you personalized hints.
So it's not just like those generic error messages that leave you scratching your head.
No, it actually analyzes your code and understands the context of your error.
Wow, that's impressive. It's like having a coding tutor who's available 24/7.
And it can really help you get unstuck when you're feeling lost.
That's so helpful, especially when you're just starting out and everything feels overwhelming.
But sometimes, even with the best AI assistance, you still need to figure things out on your own.
Right. There's no substitute for that feeling of satisfaction when you finally crack the chem yourself.
And Algo Academy recognizes that they have these tutorials that are kind of unique. They often have intentional bugs built into them.
Intentional bugs. Are you serious?
I know, right? Sounds counterintuitive, but it's like a coding mystery. You have to analyze the clues and figure out where the bug is hiding.
That's actually a pretty cool idea. It's like a detective game for programmers.
Exactly. And because it's in a controlled environment, you can experiment and make mistakes without breaking anything.
It's like training wheels for debugging.
Exactly. And then they have this awesome community aspect too. Their forums are super active with learners of all levels helping each other out.
Oh yeah, online communities can be such a valuable resource for learning.
It's like having a whole network of coding buddies who've been there and done that.
You can get advice,
Yeah.
share your experiences, and just feel like you're part of something bigger than yourself.
It's so much better than struggling alone in the dark.
Okay, so it seems like Algo Academy is really walking the walk when it comes to this whole bug-driven learning approach,
They really are. They're providing all the tools and support we need to not just tolerate bugs, but actually embrace them as teachers.
which is a pretty radical shift in mindset from the traditional approach of trying to avoid bugs at all costs.
Right. Because let's face it, bugs are inevitable.
Yeah, part of the process.
Exactly. And the article goes beyond just Algo Academy. It talks about how this bug-driven learning philosophy can benefit us as programmers in general.
Okay, so let's zoom out a bit. What does this mean for us beyond just a specific platform?
It's about developing a new way of thinking about our work. Instead of striving for perfection, we need to accept that bugs are going to happen.
And instead of getting discouraged, we can see them as opportunities to learn and grow.
It's about developing resilience, that ability to bounce back from setbacks.
Because those debugging battles,
Yeah.
they make us stronger in the long run.
They force us to think outside the box, to get creative with our solutions.
And to use all the resources available to us, whether it's online documentation, debugging tools, or the wisdom of the community.
So it's not just about technical skills, it's also about developing that mental toughness, that persistence.
Oh yeah, the mental game of debugging can be brutal sometimes.
It's a roller coaster of emotions, that feeling of frustration when you're stuck, and then that incredible rush of relief when you finally fix it.
And the article talks about how to stay sane during those tough moments.
Right, like taking breaks is super important. Sometimes you just need to step away from the code, clear your head, and come back with fresh eyes.
Oh yeah, sometimes the solution just magically appears after you've taken a break.
And breaking down those complex problems into smaller chunks, that can be really helpful too.
Right? It's easy to get overwhelmed when you're staring at a giant wall of code.
So instead of trying to tackle the whole thing at once, just focus on one small piece at a time.
And don't forget the power of collaboration.
Right. Reach out to your colleagues, mentors, online communities. There's so much collective knowledge out there.
Sometimes just explaining your problem to someone else can help you see the solution.
Okay, so we've talked about how Algo Academy supports bug-driven learning, the broader implications of this approach, and some strategies for staying sane when debugging gets tough. But before we wrap up this part, I'm curious.
Me too. I've got a story, actually. I was working on this project a while back, and I ran into this bug that I swear I spent days trying to fix.
Oh no, what was it?
It was driving me crazy. I was console logging everything I could think of, stepping through the code line by line, but I just couldn't figure out what was wrong.
I've been there. It's the worst feeling.
So finally I decided to just step away from it, went for a walk, got some fresh air, and when I came back, I took another look at the code, and I realized I had made the silliest mistake.
What was it?
I had accidentally capitalized a variable name in one place and not in another.
Oh no, the classic case sensitivity issue.
I know, right? I felt so stupid. But it was also a good reminder that sometimes the simplest solution is the right one.
And it's so easy to overlook those tiny details when you've been staring at the code for hours.
Absolutely. So I guess the lesson learned is to take breaks,
Yeah.
clear your head, and sometimes the answer will just come to you.
That and always double check your capitalization.
Definitely. All right, so I'm curious to hear from our listeners, what are some of your most memorable bug-busting moments?
What are those bugs that have taught you valuable lessons?
Share your stories with us on social media and tag the show. We'd love to hear from you. So we spent the last two parts of this deep dive really getting into the nitty-gritty of bugs.
We've seen how they can actually make us better programmers if we approach them with the right mindset.
Instead of dreading them, we can see them as opportunities to learn and grow.
Exactly. And we've talked about all these strategies and resources like Algo Academy that can help us embrace this whole bug-driven learning approach.
But now in this final part, I think it's time to step back and think about the bigger picture.
Like, how do we actually integrate this philosophy into our everyday coding lives?
Yeah, beyond just specific tools or techniques, what does it really mean to embrace a bug-driven learning mindset?
It all starts with a fundamental shift in perspective. Instead of seeing bugs as these annoying enemies that we have to defeat,
Right, like they're personal attacks on our coding abilities.
exactly, we need to start seeing them as opportunities for growth.
Like each bug is a little puzzle that we need to solve.
And the process of solving that puzzle is what makes us better programmers.
It's not just about getting to the solution, it's about the journey, the lessons we learn along the way.
And one of the most important lessons is that bugs are normal.
Everyone encounters them, from beginners to seasoned professionals.
It's part of the process of creating software.
So instead of beating ourselves up when we hit a bug, we can take a deep breath.
And approach it with a curious mind.
Okay, so we've got the right mindset now.
Well, I think it's helpful to have a systematic approach to debugging.
Yeah, we talked about that five-step process earlier. Stessa, analyze, hypothesize, test, implement.
Having that structure can really help, especially when you're feeling lost and overwhelmed.
It breaks down the problem into manageable steps.
And then there are all the amazing resources that are available to us.
Yeah, we've talked about Algo Academy, but there are also all these debugging tools built into our IDEs.
Online tutorials, blog posts, forums, communities.
We're not alone in this journey.
There's a whole world of support out there.
So to sum it all up, embracing a bug-driven learning approach is about shifting our perspective,
Developing a systematic process,
utilizing the resources available to us.
and connecting with our fellow programmers.
It's about seeing those frustrating moments as opportunities for growth.
And celebrating those victories no matter how small.
Every bug we squash is a testament to our perseverance and our growing understanding of code.
So let's raise a virtual glass to those bugs.
May they continue to challenge us and teach us.
And may we emerge from each bug-busting adventure as better programmers.
And that's a wrap on our deep dive into the world of bugs.
Happy coding, everyone!